She was left for being too small, until a giant Comanche built her a cabin. Dry Creek, New Mexico, early spring 1878. The sun had barely risen over the dust-worn buildings when Clara Wynne pushed open the door to Dry Creek General Store. Her boots were scuffed, her hat too big for her head, and the handles of a short hoe stuck out awkwardly from the bundle on her back. At just 4'7", no, 4'6½", she'd measured, Clara barely came up to the store counter. But her gaze didn't flinch. Inside, the murmur of voices stopped. A tall woman near the barrels whispered, "She's no bigger than a house cat." "And half as useful," someone snorted. Clara stepped forward, placing her items on the counter, a sack of corn seed, a folded piece of canvas, a bundle of kindling, and a hoe with a shortened handle. Mr. Barlow, the storekeeper, peered over his spectacles and raised an eyebrow. "Well, well, if it ain't Miss Wynne. What's this, spring planting?" He picked up the hoe and twirled it. "You planning to dig graves for field mice or just burying sparrows for practice?" The room burst into low laughter. Clara looked him square in the eye. "I'm planting corn, on my land." Mr. Barlow grunted, weighing the sack. "That rocky patch up north? Not even the cactus want it. Then I'll grow something they don't expect." He chuckled. "With this?" He thumped the hoe on the counter. "This tool weighs half what you do." Clara opened her coin purse and counted out every last cent she had. "It'll do." She took the sack, the hoe, and her pride, and walked out into the morning light. The laughter followed her like dust. She didn't turn around. Inside, the air carried grit and wind. Clara crossed the wooden sidewalk, the bundle heavy across her back, when a shadow stepped into her path. Thomas Keene. His hat sat too low on his brow, and his boots were polished like a sheriff's. He was the son of the Hargrove family, the same folks who once took her in as a charity girl during the westward wagon train, then abandoned her near the New Mexico border when sickness came and she became too small to be useful. "Well, look who crawled out of the dirt," Thomas drawled, arms folded across his vest. "Clara Wynne, little Clara. Didn't we leave you behind somewhere?" She tried to step past, but he blocked her. "I heard you claimed land," he said, grinning. "Tell me, are you growing tumbleweeds or just trying to get eaten by coyotes?" "I've got work to do," Clara muttered. Thomas reached and yanked the sack from her grip. The hoe clattered to the ground, and seed spilled across the dust. "Oops," he said. Clara lunged to grab her things, but Thomas nudged her aside with the toe of his boot. "This ain't a place for dolls, Clara. You'll be dead or married to some outlaw before the first frost." He laughed, until the air behind him shifted. A shadow rose from the ridge behind the store. Silent, broad, Grey Wolf. He didn't say a word at first, just stepped forward, towering, lean, with hair in braids and a carved necklace resting against his bare chest. His eyes, dark and unmoving, fixed on Clara's spilled sack. Thomas turned, froze. Grey Wolf stooped, lifted the hoe with one hand and handed it to Clara. Then he crouched, carefully scooping corn back into the torn sack, as if it were gold dust. Finally he stood, towering above both. His voice was low, gravel smooth. "The earth does not care how small you are." Thomas took a step back. Grey Wolf turned to Clara and held out the sack. She took it, her fingers brushing his calloused palm. "Thank you," she whispered. He didn't reply. He knelt once more, drew something from his belt pouch, and placed it gently beside her feet. A single eagle feather, bound in a strip of leather. Then, without a word, he turned and walked back toward the ridge, his steps silent over the gravel. Thomas stared after him, jaw tight. Clara picked up the feather, her hand still trembling. She didn't look at Thomas again. She adjusted the sack, lifted the hoe over her shoulder, and walked out of town, feet sore, heart pounding, but chest higher than when she came. Behind her, the laughter was gone, and though she didn't know his name, Clara felt the weight of something new against her ribs. Not just a feather, but the first proof that she was seen, and maybe, just maybe, believed in. The wind howled through the cottonwoods that clung to the edge of the arroyo. Clara Wynne, 5 feet and 1 inch of stubbornness, was wrestling with a crooked fence post and losing. Her hands, calloused but still small as a child's, gripped the shovel as she tried to carve a hole into the rocky soil. She had returned from town the day before with a cart full of supplies, seeds, a rusted hoe, a spool of wire, and wood scraps from a dismantled chicken coop. Her shelter, if it could be called that, was a lean-to made from warped boards and tarped canvas, pitched at the edge of her 20-acre claim. Each night, the wind clawed through the cracks, and she curled up under the tattered patchwork quilt her mother once stitched from dresses long gone. That quilt, soft with age, held the last warmth of her family, lost to fever back in Missouri. "You're little, Clara," her mother had said once, pressing that same quilt around her shoulders, "but the wind lifts what it does not crush, and you, my girl, were made to fly." Now the wind only mocked her. Clara drove the shovel in again. It bounced off a stone with a thud that jarred her arms. She let out a breath, wiped sweat from her brow, and crouched to pry the stone loose with her bare hands. As she tugged, something snapped in her chest. Not pain, but frustration, bitter and deep. That night it rained. Not hard, but steady, cold desert rain that found every crack in her roof. She curled on her cot, water dripping onto the canvas beside her, fingers clenched tight around the quilt. She did not sleep. At dawn, she stepped outside, soaked and shivering. That was when she saw it. On the flat stone before her doorway sat a small wooden bird, no longer than her hand, carved in perfect detail. The wings were slightly spread, the tail curved as if catching a breeze. It was smooth as river-polished bone, and under the base, burned into the grain, were 3 simple words. "I saw you." Clara's breath caught. She picked up the bird, holding it like something sacred. The wood was warm despite the morning chill. She looked toward the distant ridge, the one she always felt eyes from, but saw only mist curling off the rocks. She said nothing. She simply placed the bird gently inside her shelter and returned to work. 3 days later, the sky darkened again. Thunder rolled low across the foothills. Clara scrambled to reinforce the lean-to with a canvas scrap, climbing atop a crate to lash the corner tighter. Wind yanked the fabric from her grip. Rain began to fall. She lost her footing, the crate slid, and she tumbled hard into the mud. Dazed, gasping, she looked up and saw him. He stood in the rain like a shadow made flesh, tall, broad-shouldered, his black hair braided with strips of red leather. He moved with the silence of stone. Without a word, he stepped past her and grabbed the flapping tarp. In one motion, he anchored it with a length of rope, then reinforced the back wall with stacked wood. Clara rose slowly, clutching her arm. "Why are you here?" He did not answer at first. He turned, eyes dark as night, and met hers. "You listen to the ground," he said at last, voice deep but calm. "You do not fight it. That is worth keeping." She blinked, rain running down her face. "You carved the bird?" He nodded once. "It is called Tsiqua-ta, sparrow. Small, but it sings before the storm ends." She said nothing, just looked at him, this stranger who spoke like the wind and worked like a man possessed. She stepped inside her lean-to, returned with her canteen, and held it out. He hesitated. Then gently he took it, drank one measured sip, returned it to her with a nod. "I am called Grey Wolf," he said. "Tashida." She offered her name in return. "Clara." Another nod. Then he turned to go. But before he vanished into the rain, he paused. "Build your roots deep, Clara Sparrow," he said, "so they do not wash away." And then he was gone. But the storm no longer seemed so cruel. It had brought her something. Nothing. Perhaps a beginning. The morning sun filtered through pale clouds as Clara struggled to drive another post into the earth. Her hands ached from the day before, her fingers raw despite the scraps of cloth she had wrapped around them. The fence was barely waist-high, more symbolic than functional. But it marked something, her claim, her effort. That was when she heard the sound behind her. Not hooves, not boots. Softer. She turned and saw him again. Grey Wolf, carrying a bundle of trimmed pine logs on his shoulder like they weighed nothing. He stopped just shy of the line of stakes she had placed and tilted his head toward the unfinished section of fence. "This," he said, "is not strong." Clara set her jaw. "It is what I can manage." He looked at her a moment, then nodded. "Together, better." He dropped the logs with a heavy thud and began setting the first one without waiting for permission. Clara hesitated, then grabbed her hammer. Side by side they worked in a rhythm not quite spoken. He drove stakes, she braced them. He cut rails, she measured the distance between them using her own arms as a guide. By the time the sun climbed higher, she was panting and covered in sawdust. "You work too fast," she said between breaths. He didn't stop. "You keep up." Clara let out a short laugh. "Barely." They paused under the cottonwood's sparse shade. She sat on a low stump, sipping from her canteen. Grey Wolf crouched nearby, sharpening a hand axe with a river stone. "I was taken once," he said suddenly. Clara blinked. "Taken?" He nodded. "Mission school. Far south. They cut my hair, gave me a number instead of a name, said my tongue was wrong, my gods were wrong, my ways were wrong." She frowned. "How old?" 10 summers. He looked toward the ridge. "I left after 2, escaped through a creek bed during winter, walked 4 days to find my people again." Clara sat very still. "That must have been terrifying." "It was cold," he said simply. She studied his face, the calm in it, the quiet strength. "I never went to school. Not really. My father taught me to read before he died. After that I had books and work. But people always looked at me and said I was too small, useless. Pretty little thing, they'd say. No good for farming, no good for a man, just a waste of space." "You are not," Grey Wolf said without hesitation. Clara looked away. Her voice dropped. "Sometimes I believed them." He stood and walked to his pack. After a moment he returned and knelt before her. In his large hands he held a pair of gloves, soft deer hide, worn smooth, stitched by hand. He placed them in her lap. "Wood has splinters," he said. "So does pride. Protect your hands, both kinds." She looked down at the gloves, then up at him. "You made these?" He nodded once. "Thank you," she said, voice tight with emotion. "No one's ever given me something like this." "You earned it, you stay, you build. That is rare." They returned to work without further talk. The gloves fit perfectly. That afternoon, after the fence was finished, they stood looking over the land. Her garden patch, the lean-to, the fledgling fence line. Grey Wolf folded his arms. "This will not last, Winter." Clara's throat tightened. "I know." He turned toward her. "Let me build a cabin." She blinked. "A what?" He pointed toward the ridge line. "There is good pine, strong. I can bring it down, build real walls. A roof with weight. A fire that stays. A home to survive, not just hide." Clara felt her heart thud. "You want to build me a house?" He nodded. "Yes." "Grey Wolf, if people in town find out—" "I do not ask them," he said, voice low but firm. "I ask you." Their eyes met. His were steady, unreadable, but sincere. Clara swallowed hard. She looked at her lean-to, at her quilt drying on the line, her hands still cradling the gloves. "A home." She looked back at him. "I'll think about it." He did not press, only said, "I will come when the moon is new. If you say yes, I bring tools." Then he turned and walked back toward the ridge, his footsteps as soft as mist over stone. But something had changed in the air, not just survival now. Something more. A possibility. The wind smelled like pine that morning, clean and sharp, carrying the faint sound of a hatchet striking wood. Clara wiped her brow with the edge of her sleeve and stepped back as Grey Wolf set another beam in place. The structure was beginning to rise, real walls, real angles. A cabin, not a shelter. He had brought the logs himself, thick ponderosa pine, bark stripped and trimmed to fit. He showed her how to cut notches, how to set the beams so they interlocked at the corners like fingers folded in prayer. "No nails," he said. "Wood does not like metal. It holds its own weight if cut right. Clara marveled at the precision of his movements. He worked with silence and certainty, like a man speaking in a language only the trees could understand. She tried to keep up, measuring, sawing, dragging bark. Her arms ached, her back screamed, but she kept going. Late that afternoon, as the sun bent westward, Grey Wolf paused by the tallest post they had set. He took out his knife. Clara watched, puzzled. He crouched beside the beam and began carving with slow, sure strokes. She stepped closer and saw the shape forming. A bird, not just any bird. A sparrow, wings tucked, eyes alert, carved right into the beam that would sit just above the doorframe. "For luck?" she asked softly. He looked at her. "So the roof knows who lives below it." Her throat caught. "Is that for me?" He nodded. "You are the sparrow. Small does not mean weak. Sparrow flies when others sink." She reached out and traced the carving with her fingertips. "Thank you." He stepped back, then gestured toward the ridge. "Tomorrow, we raised the roof." But the roof would not come without trouble. The next day, while Clara was collecting water from the spring, she saw Amos Lang riding past the edge of her land. He did not wave. He did not nod. Just stared, hard. And then he turned his horse and rode back toward Dry Creek. That night, Clara could not sleep. When she woke at dawn, her breath visible in the cold, she stepped outside the old lean-to to find something nailed to the weathered wood. A scrap of burlap, scrawled in charcoal, "No white girl who loves Injuns is welcome." She stared at it for a long time. Then she tore it down. Grey Wolf arrived not long after, carrying a fresh beam across his shoulders. When he saw her holding the note, he stopped. She handed it to him without a word. He read it. His expression did not change. Then he walked to the small fire pit, struck a match, and dropped the burlap into the flames. The fire crackled, smoke curling skyward. He said, "Wood does not ask skin color. It only asks, whose hands built me?" Clara looked at the half-framed cabin, the smooth pine, the bird carved into the beam. She looked at Grey Wolf. "I want to finish it," she said. He nodded once. "Then we do." And they returned to work, hammering silence into strength. It was near midday when the dust began to rise in the south, curling above the mesquite brush like smoke from a bad omen. Clara stepped down from the porch beam she had been sanding and shaded her eyes. 6 riders. At the front, Sheriff Beck, his badge gleaming, mustache stiff like a broom handle. Behind him, the Keene brothers, Amos Lang, and 3 other men she recognized only by their scowls. Grey Wolf stood beside the woodpile, splitting logs with quiet rhythm. He paused as the horses drew close, his axe still in hand but lowered. "Ms. Wynne," Sheriff Beck called, stopping 10 paces from the half-built cabin, "we need to talk." Clara walked to the edge of the clearing, spine straight despite the pounding of her heart. "What is it, Sheriff?" He glanced at Grey Wolf, then back at her. "There's been a report of stolen horses out of the Jenkins ranch, 4 of them missing since last week. Witnesses say they saw a tall Indian riding through the southern trail. Matches this one's description." "He's been here," Clara said calmly, "every day, building my home." "Are you sure?" Beck's eyes narrowed. "You vouch for him?" "I do," Clara said. "He's on my land. That cabin is being built on my claim. What he's done here, he's done with my permission." A murmur rippled through the men behind the sheriff. Someone spat in the dirt. Beck looked past her to Grey Wolf. "Step down from that axe, son. We do not want trouble." Grey Wolf met his gaze, steady and unflinching, but he set the axe down, slowly, deliberately. "You got any proof he did not take those horses?" Beck asked. "You got any proof he did?" Clara replied. "Or is it enough he's Comanche and breathes?" Beck's jaw clenched. "He's on private land, Sheriff," Clara continued. "If you want him off, you'll need a warrant." Amos Lang sneered. "She's bewitched, plain and simple. That savage has got her building shrines to devilry. That savage built me a home stronger than any man in this town offered," Clara snapped. For a moment, silence settled like dust. Then hoofbeats echoed again. Another rider approached, older, refined, hair swept back beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Her carriage was unmistakable even on horseback. Matilda Everdeen, the most respected woman in Dry Creek, widow of the town's founder. Her word could calm a riot or start one. She pulled up beside Beck and dismounted gracefully. "John," she said, nodding to the sheriff. "Gentlemen." They all mumbled greetings, uncertain. "Before we sling accusations," Mrs. Everdeen said crisply, "perhaps I should clarify something." She pulled a folded paper from her satchel. "This morning, the Jenkins Ranch recovered all 4 of their horses. They had broken loose during the last thunderstorm. Found them grazing by Willow Gulch. No signs of theft." Beck reached for the paper, frowning as he read. "Then what the hell is this about?" Amos growled. Mrs. Everdeen turned her sharp eyes on him. "This is about fear, Mr. Lang, and how quickly men forget themselves when faced with change." She turned to Clara, voice softening. "You built this home with your own hands?" "Not alone," Clara said, glancing at Grey Wolf, "but I helped." Matilda looked at the cabin, then back at the sheriff. "Well then," she said, "I see no crime here, just construction." Beck sighed. "You sure about this, Matilda?" "As sure as I was when your mother gave me her wedding ring and said, 'Trust the girl who dares stand alone.'" The sheriff cleared his throat. "All right then, we will be on our way." He turned, muttering orders. The men wheeled their horses around. Before they left, Beck gave Grey Wolf a long look. "You stay clean, son." Grey Wolf did not reply. He did not need to. Once the dust settled, Clara stood frozen, breath shallow. Her knees trembled. Grey Wolf stepped forward. He said nothing, but he laid his large hand gently on her shoulder. Not to claim, not to warn. Just to steady her. The warmth sank deep through her bones. Ah! Clara closed her eyes and let it hold her. The morning after the confrontation with Sheriff Beck, Clara woke to an unfamiliar sound. Voices. Multiple voices. Not arguing, not shouting, but speaking all at once in a current of purpose. She threw off her blanket and stepped out from beneath the makeshift canvas flap she had tied between 2 saplings, her boots sinking slightly into the damp, newly softened earth, and froze. Half a dozen wagons were lined up along the rise above her plot, their wheels thick with red dust. Horses shifted and snorted in the morning chill. Men and women were climbing down, some with baskets in their arms, others carrying planks, crates, or tools over their shoulders. Children scampered behind them, already curious, already helpful. Leading them was Matilda Everdeen, her gray hair tucked beneath a wide-brimmed hat, her boots worn but defiant against the slope of the land. "Good morning, Miss Wynne," she called out, her voice as firm as the ground beneath them. "We have a house to finish, do we not?" Clara stood speechless. Her hands, still smudged from yesterday's work, clenched unconsciously at her sides. Behind her, Grey Wolf stepped from the half-built doorway, axe still across his back. His dark eyes scanned the unexpected visitors, his posture unreadable. Matilda approached the cabin's edge. "These folks," she said, gesturing back with her gloved hand, "are not here to gawk or gossip. They are here to help and to give." First came the Millers, placing a worn but lovingly kept rocking chair on the porch and a small black cook stove beside the entryway. The Cooper brothers followed, their wagons stacked with window glass, hinges, and tools of the trade. The Williams family brought preserves, smoked meat, and a heavy wool quilt that Clara instantly recognized as hand-stitched. More came: wood, nails, shingles, food, a spare axe, even a sack of coffee beans wrapped in brown paper. One by one, settlers from Dry Creek offered what they could, some with labor, some with gifts. Others just nodded in quiet recognition of something they could not explain. Clara's throat tightened. She had prepared herself to be alone, to be laughed at, to be whispered about behind turned backs. She had not prepared for this. She glanced sideways at Grey Wolf. His face remained unreadable, but his stance softened. His hands, always so still, opened slightly at his sides, as if accepting this offering from people he had no reason to trust. And then they began. All morning, the valley echoed with the sound of tools and conversation. Clara moved among them, helping where she could, carrying shingles to the roof, smoothing mud and straw between logs, fetching nails with bare hands that had long since grown used to splinters. Grey Wolf worked beside the Coopers, hoisting beams with a strength that made others fall silent. He carved joints, checked angles by eye alone, and cut notches so clean they slid together without need for correction. His presence, once a source of suspicion, now grounded the work in something solid and lasting. By late afternoon, the roof stood complete. Sunlight caught on the new glass windows, casting ribbons of gold inside the single room. The stove was fitted, its chimney already curling a test line of smoke into the breeze. Doors hung straight. The floor was swept. Clara stood in the center of the cabin, no, the house, and slowly turned. It was bigger than she had imagined. Warmer. Real. She heard footsteps behind her and turned. Grey Wolf approached from the doorway, a small bundle cradled in his hands, wrapped in soft, aged doeskin. "For you," he said simply. Clara stepped forward, untied the bundle, and opened the cloth. Inside was a silver bracelet. The stone set into it was turquoise, aged smooth by touch and time. Etched into the metal were small symbols, clouds, wind, and a single bird, caught mid-flight. It shimmered not with luxury, but with history. "It belonged to my wife," Grey Wolf said, his voice low, reverent. "She wore it until the fever came." Clara's fingers faltered. I cannot take this. It is too precious." "Huh?" "You do not take it," he said. "It finds you. It chose you." Her chest swelled with something that felt like breath after years of holding it. Slowly she slipped the bracelet over her wrist. It fit, not loosely, not tightly, as if it had always belonged there. The others finished hammering the last nails and began to pack their wagons. The sun dipped toward the hills, casting long shadows across the grass. One by one, the neighbors departed, leaving gifts, handshakes, and soft-spoken promises to visit again. Mrs. Everdeen was the last to leave. "You've made something real here," she said, eyes on Clara, then turned to Grey Wolf. "And you've kept your promise." He bowed his head slightly, the gesture filled with more gravity than words. When silence returned to the foothills, Clara sat on the porch step. The bracelet caught the last of the light, and beside her, Grey Wolf watched the sun descend. For the first time since she arrived in Dry Creek, Clara did not wonder where else she could go. She was already home. The full moon set, and dawn's light crept across the foothills. Grey Wolf stood at the front of Clara's cabin, the morning air still and expectant. In his hand, the silver bracelet glinted. A promise and a question. "I must go," he said softly, voice steady. "The council must know who you are and why you matter. I go now. In 7 days, if you still wear the bracelet, then we begin again." Clara swallowed, her throat tight with hope. She reached up, adjusting the turquoise bracelet on her wrist. "I will wear it," she said without hesitation, voice calm though her heart trembled. "I will be here." Grey Wolf dipped his head in gratitude, his dark eyes holding hers for long seconds. He mounted his horse, turned once to face her fully, and rode northward into the rising sun. A silence fell over the cabin after he left, an absence resonating deeper than words could say. Clara stepped inside and touched the silver door frame, coated with his palm print. It felt warm. Strength. Clara walked into Dry Creek Town the next day and sought out Reverend Miller at the small white church nestled behind the general store. Sunlight slanted through stained glass and dust motes twirled in the air. "Reverend," she began carefully, "I need your help." He looked up from his desk, his spectacles perched at the bridge of his nose. "Miss Wynne, what troubles you?" She swallowed. "Grey Wolf returned from the council this morning. She paused. Her voice caught. "We wish to marry." His face grew stern. He removed his glasses and sighed heavily. "Clara, I can't officiate this. It is unconventional. I fear the parish would scandalize. My duty is to our traditions." Tears pricked her eyes. "I understand." He hesitated. "I pray you find some path." Clara bowed her head and left, dignity intact despite the ache. Outside, she found Mrs. Everdeen sweeping the porch of the general store. The older woman looked up and offered a gentle smile. "Mrs. Everdeen," Clara said hesitantly, "I'm to be married to Grey Wolf. Reverend Miller refused. I hoped. Might you—" The older woman paused, then set aside her broom. "Child, I have helped build more than one frontier. If no one else will stand for love, I will." Clara blinked, astonished. "You would?" Mrs. Everdeen tipped her head confidently. "I will. If you wear his bracelet for 7 days, I'll stand with you." Clara's gratitude overflowed. "Thank you." Each passing day, Clara rose before sunrise. She worked on the cabin's garden, tending young corn and squash, her bracelet glinting in the earth's dust. Her heart carried both longing and anticipation. On the 7th dawn, Grey Wolf returned. His horse advanced up the cabin's rough path. Clara stood on the porch, the silver bracelet still on her wrist, the only change in her life. He dismounted slowly, approaching without hesitation. She felt the world pause. "It is still there," he murmured. She held out her arm. "It is mine." He fastened his gaze on her, eyes deep as dark waters. Then, without ceremony, he pulled her into his arms. They rose and walked up the rocky slope behind the cabin. Grey Wolf led her to a flat rock high above the foothills. Wind whispered through pine needles. He knelt, carefully removing a pouch from his belt. Inside, a small bundle of sacred paints and feathers. "Comanche ceremony," he explained. He painted 2 lines on her cheek, red clay for life, black soot for protection, then did the same for himself. They exchanged necklaces braided of sinew and bone. He spoke promises in his language about walking together, honoring earth, sky, and each other. Clara repeated, awkward but earnest. At the end, Grey Wolf raised his arm wide. "Let all spirits bear witness." They touched foreheads, a quiet vow exchanged under the attentive sky. At noon, they walked arm in arm into Dry Creek. Residents fell silent as they passed. Some watched behind curtains, others nodded in respect. Mrs. Everdeen waited at the door to her home. Inside, the room brimmed with modest decorations, wild flowers, chairs placed in a half circle, a small wooden lectern. Clara stood next to Grey Wolf. Mrs. Everdeen read aloud, "Laws of the territory, words of love, acceptance, and enduring partnership." Although the Reverend had withheld blessing, the old pioneer widow spoke from her own heart, of courage, of justice, of the unity they had built. After her words, Mrs. Everdeen held their hands. "I now pronounce you married by covenant of truth, bravery, and love." Clara's eyes shimmered with tears. She hugged Mrs. Everdeen. Then Grey Wolf took her hands. Dusk found them on the cabin porch. The last light pulsed across the glass window and the freshly nailed boards. Inside, supper cooking over the stove. Outside, the air cooled, filled with the smell of pine and earth. Clara leaned on him, her bracelet silver against his dark coat. She whispered, "I was small once, too small for them, but now I have a home, built by someone who sees strength in that smallness." Grey Wolf shifted to face her, moonlight catching in his eyes. He brushed a finger across the bracelet's turquoise. "You showed your worth, stone by stone, choice by choice. You are no longer small. You are my equal, my family." Silence, but full and deep, pulsed between them. A gentle breeze rustled the pine needles overhead. An owl called from the ridge. Their future was uncertain. Storms would come, whispers would rise, but they rested in this moment. 2 people, bound by earth and sky, by love and endurance. And in that shelter of their own making, they chose each other, without apology, without regret, as the world spun patiently onward into the night. If this story stirred something deep within you, if it reminded you that even the smallest among us can carry the greatest strength, then you've just touched the heart of what we do here. At Wild West Love Stories, we bring you tales of impossible love, fierce resilience, and quiet moments that change everything. Stories where honor lives in calloused hands and love defies the rules. of the frontier. So if Clara and Grey Wolf's journey meant something to you, don't let it end here. Hit subscribe, join our growing community, and saddle up for the next unforgettable ride. Because out here in the Wild West, love may be rare, but when it comes, it builds something that even time cannot tear down.